Hello and welcome back to the Hazzabhajan YouTube channel. It is Harry here, and today it is time for another biopic, this time focusing on the legendary German goalkeeper Bert Trautmann. I know his story has been turned into a film entitled The Keeper, which I have not seen yet. I know, shame on me, but it is too good to ignore for a video like this. He was one of the pivotal figures in re-establishing positive relationships with the Germans, considering the time during which he played, which was in the post-World War II era. If you go on to enjoy this video, hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't done so already, and whilst you're also at it, ring that notification bell so you get notified when I upload every single time I do so. So without further ado, let's get started. Trautmann was born in 1923 in Bremen, Germany, at a time when the German economy was failing significantly, and owing to mass inflation after fake money was being printed and distributed in its droves, prices went from 1,800 marks per US dollar in June 1923 to 1 million marks per US dollar by August. Germany needed someone who could come in and turn around the economy's fortunes, especially since they still owed the West billions of marks, or dollars, in reparations as a result of the Versailles Treaty imposed on them after World War I. Adolf Hitler's Nazi Party, and if this video gets taken down as a result of me using those words, then so be it, was seen by many to be the solution, especially since the democratic powers had, in their eyes, failed Germany. After their popularity steadily grew, Hitler became Chancellor in 1933 and President in 1934 and set about radical reforms. One of them was the Hitler Jugend, or Hitler Youth, which was not mandatory but strongly encouraged by the Nazi Party, where young boys would be trained to become physical specimens and girls would be trained how to become a mother and look after the household. Trautmann, aged just 10 when this was established, jumped at the chance to sign up for it, as despite being one of the brightest in his class, he was more interested in physical activity, and the opportunity to play endless sports was too good to turn down. And considering he was already very talented at both football and sprinting, he was only going to get better. Of course, little did he realise at the time that they were being trained to become soldiers in the conflict which would eventually occur, and historians have noted that people born in 1923, Trautmann's own year of birth, was the worst hit year in terms of people who failed to make it out post-World War II, as they were only being trained to know how to fight for their country and for the Führer. Quite simply, that was all they knew. Trautmann became a favourite as a result of his allegiances to the cause, his sporting prowess, and his blonde hair and blue eyes, making him a part of the Iron Race which Hitler so fervently propagated as the future of the human race. He won long jump, grenade throwing and 60-metre sprint competitions, eventually becoming the champion of Northern Germany. He was renowned for losing his temper very easily though, and was nearly expelled from the school after he retaliated after a bully hit him in the face, although as a result of his friend's actions, he was spared from expulsion. In 1937, he was chosen out of 60 people to spend a land year away from Bremen and at a castle farm in Silesia, where he would continue his Nazi indoctrinated studies of genetic biology, as well as sporting activities and more training to enhance his physical qualities. By the end of the year, his athletics team took part in the National Athletics Championships, or the Youth Olympics as they were called, and he came second across the entire country in grenade throwing, long jump and the 60-metre sprint. After another year working as an apprentice on an agricultural plant, he returned home much stronger and much more aloof too, even having the temerity to ask his mother why she married his father, albeit not in a positive light as he didn't really trust his father all that much. He was perceived, in Trautmann's eyes, to be very weak. War soon broke out though, and in 1940 Trautmann volunteered for the war effort as a pilot for the Luftwaffe, unaware of the menaces of war and solely focused on defeating the enemy for the Vaterland, something which he had been trained to do for the previous 7 years. He failed in his training to obtain the necessary qualifications, the first setback in his life so far, and he was instead transferred to Russia to carry out his services there. However, trouble soon arose as he fixed an Opel P4 in an attempt to gain a vehicle to forage for food, but since that wasn't allowed, he was exposed and eventually sentenced to 9 months in court-martial jail. On his second day, it was discovered that his appendix had burst, and his biographer Catching Clay states that if it was discovered just a day later, Trautmann would probably have died. And scared stiff to return to his prison cell, he stayed in the hospital for a while. He was beginning to realise the dangers of war to their fullest. The German advance on Russia would ultimately prove to be unsuccessful, and in the midst of freezing conditions, Trautmann, for one, suffered from frostbite, the Germans had to retreat. During his time in the camp, Trautmann witnessed some atrocities, including an extermination of men, women and children in a forest, crawling away from the scene unnoticed. If he had been spotted, he would have been shot, as the Einsatzgruppe didn't want any witnesses to the extermination that had just occurred. He would also be wounded by a bullet in the leg and was captured by the Soviets, although he evaded it and wound up in France in 1944, training aspiring Hitler youths, and he was awarded 2 Iron Crosses for his bravery in conflict. Yet again though, he would have another lucky escape, as whilst on leaving Clever, an Allied bombing raid was carried out, and the school Trautmann hid in suffered a direct hit. Whilst many turned left down a corridor, he noticed the door on the right and jumped into it, and when the school was hit, he was buried under rubble for 3 days, only surviving with a flask of water, but just about making it out alive. Most of the people who had turned left eventually turned out to be dead. He was then captured by the Americans, but this time, despite being told to escape by the soldiers themselves, in the sprint away, he accidentally jumped over a hedge into a British signals unit facility. He remained there for 3 days and became a prisoner of war, transferred to the Rhine and then Ostend, the place he was situated in when he found out the news of Hitler's death in 1945. The factory he was in couldn't believe it. All they had known was the Führer and to fight for him, but Trautmann, for the first time, managed to just about see through it, feeling relief as much as anything. He was eventually moved to England and, owing to his role as a paratrooper during the conflict, he was put into the west camp of the base at Marbury Hall in Northwich, which was designated for those who the British perceived to be fervent Nazis. Upon reclassification, there were 3 groups that were created. Group A for those who were perceived to be anti-Nazis, which made up around 10%. Group B for those who were perceived to be somewhat in the middle, in a grey area almost, which was around 80% of the overall count, and Group C for those who were perceived to be fervent Nazis, which again constituted the remaining 10%. Trautmann was in the latter camp. When moved elsewhere, he became a driver, ferrying around high-ranking officials, although one of them he didn't see eye to eye with, who just so happened to be a Jew. And when he was offered a drink by him, he lashed out at the official, subsequently receiving a detention for 14 days. He eventually caught the football bug whilst in a camp at Ashton and Makerfield, and he started out as a centre-half, where he was the camp's best player, but an intriguing twist of fate saw him move to goalkeeper, a position which he would never move out from. He suffered an injury in a game against the British team but refused to leave the pitch, unable to swallow his pride, but after a fight broke out which his team's goalkeeper was a part of, they asked if they could swap positions. Trautmann reluctantly obliged, and as a result of this, he became the team's goalkeeper, and that was his permanent position from there on in. He spent every 3 minutes he could indulging himself in sport, becoming extremely reclusive to outside life and slowly freeing himself from the Nazi ideologies which he had grown up knowing. In 1948 though, he had a decision to make, whether or not to be repatriated to Germany. He would have gone, but at the last minute he changed his mind, partly because he didn't want to return home in a state, partially because he had actually warmed to the country, but also partially because the girl who had fallen in love with him, Marion, was pregnant with his child. The British government offered jobs to those who stayed, and he first worked on a farm and then in a bomb disposal unit, which was much more suited to his strengths. But whilst he was there, he was offered the role as a goalkeeper for St Helens Town, which he accepted, albeit at the cost of leaving Marion and her newly born child, Freda, on their own. The news spread like wildfire. A Jerry signing for a British football side? Something which had seemed merely inconceivable a couple of years ago was now actually becoming a reality. Trautmann knew he had to impress, and he did so, pleasing the spectators who flocked en masse to see him, and his relations with the club were so good that in January 1949, when he asked for a month's leave to return home to Bremen, the club not only accepted his request, but gave him a truckload of rations and £50 to take with him home to Bremen. He was speechless. He stayed at St Helens Town until September 1949, when Man City, desperate to find a keeper to replace the legendary Frank Swift, came calling, and Trautmann accepted. The news came with instant backlash, as Manchester has been home to a thriving Jewish community for many years, especially in the aftermath of World War I, and to see a one-time Nazi advocate pull on the kit of Manchester City would be seen by some as blasphemy. However, the local rabbi wrote an open letter in a newspaper explaining that whilst he understood the atrocities his community had suffered at the hands of the Germans, one specific German wouldn't be a crime, provided that, of course, he was a decent human being, which, to all intents and purposes, Trautmann was. Upon reading the letter, he was moved significantly, and the Manchester City dressing room welcomed him with open arms. His first couple of months were littered with the spectators shouting Nazi chants at him, but during a game against Fulham, which City lost 1-0, Trautmann starred, and it could so easily have been much worse than the eventual scoreline if it wasn't for their goalkeeper. He was applauded off the pitch, and by the end of the season, not only had he won over the press, but he had also won over the hearts of the public, and anyone berating him by then was berated themselves, often by those who had berated him at the start of the season. His greatest skills were his distribution, perhaps unsurprising considering his grenade throwing exploits in the Hit the Youth, his fearlessness, given that he barely ever stayed on his line during the course of a game and went out to challenge strikers frequently, and his adroitness at penalty saving, ending up saving 60% of the penalties he faced over the course of his entire career. That is impressive. His talent was such that, when Lev Yashin was asked about world-class goalkeepers, he simply responded that it was himself and Trautmann. High praise indeed. He came very close to leaving Manchester City in 1951 owing to his mother's ill health, but she swiftly recovered and he stayed on at Main Road until 1964, when he retired, having made 545 appearances across his 15-year career in all competitions for the Citizens. However, he is best remembered by many football fans for an incident in the 1956 FA Cup final, the same year in which he won the Football Writers Association Player of the Year award. The previous season, Manchester City had reached the FA Cup final against Newcastle but lost 3-1, and their captain, Roy Paul, vowed to return much stronger the next season. With the Reevy plan in full effect, which exploited striker Dom Reevy as a quasi-false nine and Trautmann's distribution qualities, they did so, playing Birmingham in the final and eventually triumphing 3-1. 16 minutes from time though, Trautmann collided heavily with Birmingham's Peter Murphy whilst collecting the ball at his feet, yet despite being knocked out, he carried on, his never say die attitude returning in full force. He even dived at the feet of another Birmingham player late on and caught a cross to be distributed out immediately, and City held on for the win. Trautmann was heralded as a hero, but it later transpired that he had broken his neck and was only saved from death after one vertebra was wedged into another. He would eventually recover and he retired a hero 8 years later, being given a testimonial which couldn't even finish, as most of the 47,000 strong crowd had poured onto the pitch just before the final whistle of the game. However, over this time, his personal life would be hit greatly, as his son John died in a car accident in 1956, merely a few months after that infamous FA Cup final. Furthermore, his wife Margaret hated most things German and refused to move there, even when Trautmann's family was suffering from ill health. In 1967, after Bert accepted a role at Preußen Münster, Margaret refused to move with him, preferring to raise her children as English and not German. And 4 years later at Christmas, she mockingly Nazi saluted him, and in a fit of rage, Trautmann ruined the Christmas dinner and stormed out the door, never to return. Undeterred, he would go on to coach in Burma, Tanzania, Liberia, Pakistan and North Yemen before retiring for good in 1988 and settling down with his wife Malice in Spain. He kept his close ties to Manchester throughout, even opening the new Kipak stand at Main Road in 1995, and his contributions to Anglo-German relations were recognised in 2004 as he was awarded an honorary OBE for his services on that front. In 2013, after suffering 2 heart attacks during the course of the year, the first German ever to play in an FA Cup final sadly passed away at his home in Spain at the age of 89. The world had lost a true icon of football, but also someone who had helped transform the relationship between England and Germany, which would have seemed almost impossible to rebuild as quickly as it had done, in his own small way. That just about concludes today's video. Thank you very much for watching. I really hope that you've enjoyed this story. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, I'll see you then.